Christopher wiped the sweat from his face as he carefully balanced a tray of ripe plantains on his head. He walked through the busy streets of Lagos, dodging cars and shouting vendors. The sun was hot, burning his worn-out slippers and old shirt. But Christopher didn't care. In his heart, he believed he was more than just a street seller. He believed he would become a rich man one day. He often dreamed of driving big cars, living in a big house, and eating in fancy restaurants. Every time he shouted to customers and sold his plantains, he held on to those dreams. He wanted a better life, a life where he didn't have to struggle every day just to feed himself. But no matter how big his dreams were, he still had to sell plantains. That was the only way he could survive. One very hot afternoon, after selling to a few people, Christopher walked into a barber shop to deliver an order. The cool air from the fan felt good on his sweaty skin. He placed the plantains on the counter and waited quietly while the barber finished cutting a man's hair. Christopher looked at the man in the chair. He was wearing a neat white shirt, shiny shoes, and a fancy wristwatch. He smelled really nice too. Everything about him showed that he was rich, richer than Christopher had ever seen. But something about the man felt familiar, though Christopher didn't know why. As the man stood up and brought out money to pay, his eyes met Christopher's. He stopped for a moment and looked at him closely, a confused look on his face. "Why are you staring like that? Do you like fine things?" the man asked with a small smile. Christopher blinked. "I was just admiring your wristwatch. And your perfume," he said shyly. The man laughed. His smile grew warmer. "What's your name, young man?" he asked. "Christopher," he answered slowly. "You can call me Mr. Bernard," the man said. "I'd rather call you sir," Christopher replied. Mr. Bernard laughed again. "You really like my watch, don't you? It's very expensive." Christopher nodded. "Yes, sir. I can't even guess how much it cost." Mr. Bernard leaned forward. "Try, guess." Christopher looked him over, thinking hard. "Maybe 100,000 naira." Mr. Bernard laughed loudly. 100,000? No, my boy, it's worth 100 times that. Christopher's eyes went wide. He quickly did the math. 10 million naira. For a wristwatch. Mr. Bernard enjoyed his reaction. He smiled and said, "I could give you this watch. But what will you give me in return?" Christopher didn't think twice. "Anything you want, sir." The man raised an eyebrow. "Anything? Okay then. Tell me, what's the most valuable thing you own?" Christopher gave a small, sad laugh. "Sir, I'm just a street hawker. I don't have anything valuable. No land, no house, nothing." Mr. Bernard asked again, "All right then, what's the most valuable thing you do have?" Christopher didn't need time to think. "A ring. My mother gave it to me before she died." "A ring?" Mr. Bernard asked, looking curious. "Can I see it?" Christopher reached into his pocket and brought out a small, old ring. It was dusty and worn, but he held it out with care. Mr. Bernard took it without much interest until he looked at it closely. His heart began to beat fast. His hand started to shake. The ring had a special mark. It was his family's seal. The world around him seemed to disappear as the truth hit him like a wave. He swallowed hard and forced himself to ask, Who was your mother?" Christopher answered family, "Her name was Grace Choku." The man's breath caught. His grip tightened around the ring. He stepped back, as if trying to steady himself. "Grace," he whispered, barely audible. His mind raced, memories flooding back like ghosts from the past. Then it hit him. This boy standing in front of him, this street hawker, this stranger he almost ignored, might be his son. The barber shop suddenly felt suffocating. The sound of clippers buzzing, men talking, and cars honking outside faded into the background. The man stared at the ring in his shaking hands. Christopher shifted uncomfortably, confused by the man's reaction. "Sir, are you okay?" The man looked up, his eyes searching Christopher's face with shock, disbelief, and something else, pain. He took a shaky breath. Your mother, Grace Chukwu. Was she from Enugu? Christopher nodded. Yes. Do you know her? The man let out a sharp breath and rubbed his face. His heart was beating so loud, he thought Christopher might hear it. I didn't just know her, he said with a strained voice. I loved her. Christopher frowned, confused. What are you talking about? The man swallowed hard and finally spoke the words that would change Christopher's life forever. Grace Chukwu was the woman I loved. I gave her this ring before I traveled to Europe for my studies, as a symbol of our love. Christopher's chest tightened. She told me this ring belonged to my roots. That I should keep it safe because I'd need it someday, he said softly. The man's voice cracked. What happened to her? When did she die? She died 5 years ago from an asthma attack, Christopher replied, his voice heavy with sadness. We didn't have enough money to buy her medicine. The man staggered, as if those words had physically hit him. His eyes filled with pain. I didn't know she was pregnant when I left for Europe. If she told you this ring belongs to your roots, that means I'm your father. And you, Christopher, you're my son? Christopher thought he had heard wrong. His mouth opened, but no words came out. His heart pounded, and his ears rang. What? He finally managed to whisper. The man looked directly at him. You are my son? Christopher took a step back, shaking his head. No. That's not true. My mother told me my father died before I was born. The man winced. She told you that? He sighed deeply and closed his eyes, trying to take it all in. She must have had her reasons. Christopher's breathing became uneven. All his life, he believed he had no father. He had grown up poor, watching his mother suffer, never knowing there was a man out there, a rich man, who could have changed everything. Anger surged in him. Where were you? He shouted, his voice shaking with rage. Where were you when my mother was suffering? The man flinched. I didn't know, Christopher. I swear, I didn't know. That's a lie. Christopher snapped. How could you not know? The barber shop fell silent. Everyone was watching them. The man took a deep breath. Let's not do this here. Come with me. Let's talk somewhere private. Christopher hesitated. But deep inside, he needed answers. Fine, he muttered. Let's talk. Mr. Bernard led Christopher to his black SUV parked outside beside the road, opened the door for him to enter, and immediately drove off. The car ride was silent and tense. Christopher sat stiffly in the soft leather seat of the man's sleek black SUV, his fist clenched. His mind was spinning, shock, anger, confusion, and a deep sadness he didn't expect. He glanced at the man beside him, his supposed father. A billionaire who had lived in comfort while he and his mother suffered in the slums of Lagos. Tell me why you had to travel to Europe without my mother, he demanded, his voice filled with controlled anger. Tell me why you abandoned her. Tell me why you left us to suffer. The man let out a long, tired sigh before he spoke. My name is Bernard Chukwu, he began. I was born into great wealth, my family owns businesses all over Nigeria. But even with all the money, my parents were controlling. They tried to control everything in my life, including who I could fall in love with. He paused and stared into the distance, lost in his memories. Then I met your mother, Grace. She was the most beautiful and kind woman I had ever known. She didn't have money and had no parents, she was an orphan, but she had something money could never buy, a good and pure heart. We fell deeply in love. It was real, Christopher. I wanted to marry her, but my parents didn't approve. To them, she wasn't our class. I fought for her, but their minds were made up. His voice trembled with emotion, filled with deep regret. I always feared my family would find a way to separate us, so I gave her this ring, he said, holding it up. It belonged to my father. He got it from his father, and it had been in our family for generations. It's a symbol of our family's legacy, one that commands respect and power. Then one day, without warning, they sent me away. I was flown to the UK for school. I didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. I didn't know Grace was pregnant. I wrote to her again and again, but my letters never reached her. My parents made sure of that. Christopher looked at him, his eyes sharp. And you never tried to come back? Bernard sighed deeply. I was young and foolish. By the time I returned, everything had changed. My parents had already arranged for me to marry another woman. I searched for Grace, but she was gone. No one knew where she had gone. I thought she had moved on with her life. If I had known she was pregnant, I would have done everything to protect and provide for both of you, he said, his eyes full of regret. The man, Mr. Bernard Choku, sat quietly, occasionally glancing at Christopher with an unreadable expression. When they reached a grand estate in Ikoyi, Christopher caught his breath. The massive gates, the security guards, the huge mansion, it looked like something from a magazine or movie. As Christopher stepped inside the house, he stared at the luxurious interior, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and large gold-framed portraits of Bernard. Everything screamed wealth and comfort, the opposite of the life he had known on the streets. Sit, Bernard said, pointing to a soft couch. Christopher hesitated, then slowly sat down, his body stiff. His mind raced. Part of him wanted to reject this man and all his riches, to walk away and never look back. But another part of him, the part that had always dreamed of leaving poverty behind, couldn't ignore the chance right in front of him. While they were talking, a woman came down the grand staircase, the sound of her high heels echoing on the shiny floor. She wore an elegant silk gown, her makeup was perfect, and her jewelry sparkled under the chandelier. But her eyes, sharp and watchful, narrowed the moment she saw Christopher. Bernard stood up straighter. Sophia, he said cautiously. There's someone I want you to meet. Sophia looked from one man to the other, her neatly shaped eyebrows drawing together. Who is this? She asked suspiciously. Bernard paused, then said carefully, This is Christopher, my son. Sophia's face changed immediately. She gripped the railing tightly. You're what? Bernard took a step closer. Sophia, I just found out about him today. I didn't know. She cut him off with a cold laugh. So suddenly, you have a son. After 20 years of marriage, you bring home a grown man and expect me to accept this. This street boy. How are you even sure he's yours? You haven't even done a DNA test. I'll ask the family doctor to do the test right away, Bernard replied firmly. But we look a lot alike, and he has a ring with my family's seal on it, the same ring I gave to his mother before my parents separated us. I'm sure he's my son. Sophia's voice rose in anger. And you expect me to welcome him into my house just like that? Christopher's jaw tightened. He had faced rejection all his life. He wasn't going to let this woman humiliate him. I'm not here for your acceptance, he said calmly. I'm here for the truth. Sophia turned her glare to him. The truth. The truth is that my husband and I have been married for 20 years, and I have given him nothing, not a child, not an heir. Her voice cracked slightly with emotion, but her expression stayed cold. And now, out of nowhere, you show up. Do you know what this means for me? Bernard sighed. Sophia, this isn't about you or me, it's about Christopher. He's my son, and I must take responsibility. Sophia crossed her arms, her lips curling in anger. Responsibility. Now you care about responsibility. Where was that when you let your family control your life? When you married me because it was the right thing for the Chokudi name. Bernard's face grew stern. That's enough. But Sophia wasn't done. She walked up to Christopher, her eyes sharp. Listen to me, boy, she said in a low, angry voice. I've worked too hard to earn my place in this family. If you think you can just walk in and take everything that's mine, you're wrong. Christopher stared back at her without flinching. I don't want anything that doesn't belong to me. Sophia gave a bitter laugh. We'll see about that. she turned to Bernard. "I hope you know what you're doing. Because bringing this boy into our lives will change everything." With that, she turned and walked quickly up the stairs, leaving an awkward silence between father and son. Bernard rubbed his forehead and sighed deeply. "I'm sorry, Christopher. Sophia. She's been through a lot." Christopher nodded but stayed alert. It was clear now, Sophia saw him as a threat. And he knew one thing for sure, she wasn't going to make his place in the family easy. Days later, tension in the Okofor household was still heavy. Sophia barely spoke to Christopher, treating him like a stranger. She avoided him as much as possible, her anger always just below the surface. Christopher, however, stayed focused. A few days later, the doctor arrived at Mr. Bernard Chukwudi's mansion. Dr. Pius stepped forward, holding a white envelope. "Sir, here are the DNA results." Bernard grabbed it with shaky hands, tore it open, and read through the paper. Paternity confirmed, 99.99%. He gasped, and the paper slipped from his fingers. He looked toward the staircase, where Christopher stood nervously, watching. Tears filled Bernard's eyes. "My son. My own blood." A big smile spread across his face. He stood up and opened his arms. "Come to me, Christopher." His heart was filled with joy, knowing he finally had a son, the child he thought he would never have. But Sophia, who had been watching quietly, didn't feel the same. She feared she was going to lose everything to Christopher. Bernard was doing everything he could to make up for lost time. He introduced Christopher to the family business and made sure he got the right education and training. But no matter how hard Bernard tried, Sophia's cold stares and harsh attitude didn't change. One evening, a grand dinner was held at the mansion. Important business guests were there, and as always, Sophia looked graceful and elegant, even though she was struggling inside. As the evening ended, she quietly excused herself and headed to her room. But she felt strange, lightheaded. Christopher, who was standing nearby, noticed her swaying. She grabbed her throat, struggling to breathe. Her eyes were wide with panic. It was an asthma attack. Her inhaler, where was it? Her legs gave out, and she collapsed near the stairs, gasping for air. Christopher reacted fast. He ran to her side, his heart racing. Hold on, he said, searching frantically. He had seen his mother go through the same thing. He knew time was critical. Where's your inhaler? He asked urgently. Sophia could barely whisper, draw. In my room. Without wasting a second, Christopher sprinted up the stairs, barely touching the ground. He rushed into her room, opened the drawer beside the bed, and grabbed the inhaler. Then he dashed back down. Sophia was slumped against the railing, her face pale and her lips turning blue. He knelt beside her and gently put the inhaler in her mouth. Breathe, Sophia. Breathe, he said softly but firmly. She inhaled slowly, shaking as the medicine started working. Her breathing became steadier, but her eyes were still full of fear. Christopher stayed by her side, holding her shoulder gently. You're okay now, he whispered, his voice calmer than she had ever heard. For the first time, Sophia really looked at him, not as a threat, not as a stranger, but as someone who had just saved her life. Tears filled her eyes as the truth hit her. She had spent weeks hating him, afraid he would take away everything she had worked for with Bernard. But in her weakest moment, when she thought she was going to die, it was Christopher, the boy she had rejected, who came to her rescue. Her lips trembled. You saved me. Christopher gave her a small nod. I wasn't going to let you die. Sophia let out a shaky breath. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Christopher replied, standing up and offering his hand. Just take it easy. She paused for a moment, then took his hand and let him help her up. From that moment, something changed between them. Sophia no longer saw Christopher as an enemy. Instead, she began to see him as something she had always wanted but never had, a son. After the night Christopher saved Sophia's life, their relationship started to change. At first, Sophia was careful and didn't know how to act around him. But something in her heart had softened. She began to notice the small things, how Christopher helped the house staff without being told, how he always showed respect even though she had been cold to him, and how hard he tried to prove himself. One afternoon, while Christopher was reading in the study, Sophia quietly walked in. He looked up, surprised. She had never come to talk to him before on her own. "I made some tea," she said, holding out a cup. "Would you like some?" Christopher blinked, surprised. Then he gave a small smile. "Thank you." He took the cup from her hands, and for the first time, Sophia noticed how much he looked like Bernard. The thought made her chest tighten, not with anger, but with something else. A few days later, she found him sitting in the garden, staring at the sky, deep in thought. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. He sighed. "My mother. I miss her." Sophia sat beside him, surprising even herself. "Tell me about her." Christopher paused, then started talking. He spoke about Grace, her kindness, her struggles, and how she always smiled no matter what. His voice was filled with both love and pain. Sophia listened closely. "I never thought I'd feel a mother's love again," he said quietly. "After she died, I felt completely alone." Sophia's throat tightened. "You're not alone anymore, Christopher." He looked at her, and for the first time, he saw true warmth in her eyes. It wasn't fake or unsure, it was real. From that day, Sophia made a real effort to be there for him. She began to cook his favorite meals, ask him about his day, and even stood up for him when Bernard scolded him too harshly. One evening, as they sat in the living room watching a movie, Christopher turned to her. "You remind me of her," he said softly. Sophia's eyes shone with tears. "And you? You're the son I never had." Tears filled Christopher's eyes too, and for the first time in years, he felt something he thought he had lost forever. He felt like he had a mother again. When Bernard walked in and saw them sitting together, laughing and sharing stories, his heart swelled with pride. His son had finally found his place. Their family was whole again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Afro Gen Z for more thrilling and heartwarming tales. See you in the next one.